Hi, and welcome to Turning World, a podcast that explores our unraveling world through conversations, hopefully stimulating, curious, and open on faith, culture, politics, and virtually everything else we can think of. I'm John Egan, and this is
Keith Hitchman. That was very good, John. You did that, without any prompt. Very good.
Yeah,
impressive.
Improvisation. We're joined today by Stephen Atkinson, who's the leader of Lancashire County Council. Stephen, as a resident of Lancashire, I witnessed firsthand your rather extraordinary and I think largely unexpected electoral landslide in last year's local elections or county council elections in Lancashire. Can you, for the benefit of our viewers, not listeners, give us a little brief introduction about your kind of political past and your current role?
Yeah, so I started off in my family business. I was a self-taught engineer, and about 11 years ago, I got a tap on the shoulder to ask if I'd be a local councillor, and that was in Ribble Valley, very nice part of Lancashire, for the Conservative Party. I think within 3 years, I was running that council. And we did really well. We froze council tax. I think it was 3 or 4 times in the 7 budgets that I was responsible for. I think I was the second longest leader ever. And I was getting ready to retire. And then I got so frustrated with what was happening with the Conservative Party nationally and how the country wasn't progressing where it should do, that I started speaking to Reform UK, and I defected on the 17th of March last year, just before the local elections. I stood in my local electoral division where I live, which was the second safest Conservative seat. I thought it'd be very close, and I ended up getting double the vote of the incumbent, who normally got 2/3 of the vote. And as you said, on that day, 53 Reform councillors were elected to Lancashire County Council, the second largest ever out of the 84 seats.
Pretty remarkable result. Keith?
Yeah, you straight into it. You have described yourself as a common sense leader. Is that correct, or more or less along the?
Yeah, I think this is a big organisation. It's one of the biggest councils in Europe. 2.1 billion gross spend, 13,500 staff. What you've got to do is build trust with the officers. You've got to have a high-performing cabinet. And we had great people. We had people who worked in the United States in IT. We had people who worked in journalism. So we had a real good talent base. And then what you've got to do is make decisions every day. Lots of decisions to make, and we try to make them in as thoughtful and considered way as possible, and we take advice. We're constrained in a way that a government wouldn't be, because we operate within a framework, a legal framework that we can't change. Nearly 2/3 of all costs go on a very small number of people. And what we're trying to do is reconnect with residents. So if I grew up in Blackburn, I lived in Blackburn until I was 17. We used to call it Corporation Pop, which was water from the tap. And that goes back to the Blackburn Corporation that started in the 1850s to provide clean water after the typhoid epidemics. And that became democratized and was very much, the councils grew from the people. And now the councils have become very remote from the people, because they're driven by government grant, they're driven by ministerial direction. And we're trying, within the legal framework we have, to reconnect much more with our residents in the way we answer the telephone and leave a number to get back to, all those things we need to do. If there's roadworks, we need to tell you when it's going to be fixed. If it's running behind, we've got to massively reconnect. So we have a saying, it's paraphrased from Robert Peel, but the people of the council and the council of the people. That's a big change that we're trying to make at the moment.
And how's that working out in practice? Have you got any examples you can give us? I mean,
well, it's starting in the May Cabinet. We've just appointed a member for Civic Pride, and Civic Pride picks up everything from celebrating Lancashire, keeping the streets clean, coming together as communities, and how we communicate with our residents, and how we always need to make sure that they understand what we're trying to do. I mean, there's difficult decisions. This year we've got 60 million of extra demand and 40 million of inflation. We've got ever growing demand and ever less resources. So it's difficult. I think some of those things you can do if you have the right frame of mind.
In a way, a couple of questions I was going to ask, I think you've already kind of touched upon them. I might kind of ask you to expand a wee bit in a minute or so, but political conversions are always quite interesting because invariably the person who switches from one party to another generally tries to say, and they, I think, often legitimately feel that it's not them that's changed, but somehow the party that they are previously connected to or loyal to has kind of moved away from where they were. Did you see that as being a kind of continuity with a set of political principles that you've always held, or did you see it as a light bulb moment where you thought, actually, I've been wrong about a few things, I need to, or I want to now change and identify with a different political movement or political party?
I think it's the first. I think I love this country like many people do, and I felt that the Conservative Party become more globalist in its approach, and we'd stop focusing on the economy. The Conservatives, I say we, I'm no longer one of them, but we haven't had economic growth per capita since 2008, since the financial crisis, and at that time, we had similar per capita income to the United States. Now the United States is 2/3 higher. If you take away the southeast of England, we're a relatively poor country. Poland will overtake per capita income by 2030 of the United Kingdom. We've got to get serious about prosperity, about generating income in the country, and I believe that wasn't a focus. The whole net zero thing, I think, is a massive act of self-harm. We have the highest energy costs. We're destroying our industries, those highly skilled jobs, that security that you need. So things like non-hate crime incidents that were brought in 2004. So fundamental values that I think that seem to just disappear. I couldn't understand Rishi Sunak's smoking ban for people of a certain age when someone a year older could smoke. It's the personal liberty, personal freedom, personal responsibility, things that I feel very strongly about.
And I suppose that kind of brings me to the question I was going to ask, I think, which you've already kind of addressed to some degree, which was, it was, I think a lot of people found it, a fairly dramatic and unexpected kind of landslide or groundswell. Certainly our local Conservative councillor, who I was serving on the local parish council with, found it a bit of a shock, because I think they honestly thought they were going to walk in and get themselves re-elected. But the scale of it, do you think that it was about people voting for something that reform represented, or was it they were voting against something, some fundamental sense of unease, something that they perhaps couldn't exactly put a finger on, but you were kind of benefiting from some kind of disquiet that characterises politics in Britain at the moment?
I think it was optimism. And I'll tell you a story that was very profound. I delivered a leaflet to a house, and I was 5 doors further down as I'm delivering my leaflets. And this lady, very delicate lady, came out and started running towards me. And she had, she was welling up, and she got towards me and she said, "Thank you, thank you, thank you. At least we feel that someone's listening to us now." And I've never seen an election campaign like it. I was high-fived, I was hugged. I feel that politicians have become very remote from people, and people really want their democracy to work for them. And I feel reform is talking in a common sense way about some of the problems that are facing the country that other people are not prepared to talk about, although they are now, because I think reform has moved the Overton window.
That last general election, and the last council election, in a way that was about the collapse of the blue wall, you could say, and the elections next week, local elections next week, looks like it's going to be about the collapse of the red wall. Is that your area? Lancashire, is that the red wall?
Yeah.
It is.
Some
Blackburn,
Preston would call it red
Blackburn.
wall. I think there's another thing that's happening, that all the investment since 2010 is going into the cities. And that's, I think, a conscious decision to try and get maximum economic growth. But the cities are sucking the life out of some of these provincial towns. And people see, when if they go to central Manchester, it's wonderful. But you come out to some of the towns in Lancashire or some of the towns on the periphery of Manchester, and they've had no investment. And I think people are frustrated. They just feel left behind, and they don't feel that people are listening to them. So I think we will do well in Lancashire. It's only in thirds this time, so only a third of the seats are up in 7 of the 14 councils, lower tier councils. But I think we'll do very well. I think we'll do well throughout the country, and particularly in coastal areas and post-industrial towns. Was it that sense of being forgotten, of no investment? It's interesting. I don't even remember the reunification of Germany when the East and West came together. The amount of money that was put into East Germany was incredible. And we've just had tokenism in terms of levelling up funding. The new railway line that goes across the north of England, nearly £40 billion, doesn't even come into Lancashire. Why couldn't we just have some money for improvements on what we were doing? And I feel this is a frustration that people have. They feel that certain areas are getting investment and others are not. And I think that's why people are so frustrated.
I think, it's a point that I think we're interested in, because I think if there's a common denominator between the two of us, and I think there is one or two common denominators, Keith.
Yeah.
Every now and again we find one. I think both of us feel that, in a sense, that traditional understanding of politics along a kind of two-dimensional spectrum of left and right is one that's kind of breaking down, because I think a lot of the issues that you've identified, and I can identify with them. I did a piece of work a few years ago in around the Devolution project in the northeast of England, and I was doing focus groups in former mining villages in Durham. And I could only describe the kind of vibe of those people and the experience of those people as being bereavement. I mean, they just felt that somehow or other their life had finished, their economic life had finished, and they hadn't even the benefit of bereavement counselling. They were just literally left marooned in places that no longer had any significance or value, and it affected their self-worth. I suppose the paradox is that reform, on the one hand, speaks very eloquently to that constituency. It speaks to that sense of resentment, that sense of loss and disinheritance. But at the top of the party, there seems to be an embrace of, neoliberal economics that one could argue has been the causal origin of some of those problems. I mean, is there a kind of paradox at the core of reform where it's trying to kind of bridge an unbridgeable coalition of voters and an ideology that just can't really deliver for the people who most need it or are most receptive to its message?
I don't agree with you, neoliberal at the top. I mean, Nigel was very clear. We need steel making capacity in this country, and when we shut down steel mills, that's one of the foundations. And if we have to have a situation where they're funded in some way, but I just feel, going back to my earlier point, that net zero, when we are shipping jobs to coal-fired India, doesn't make sense from a climate point of view and doesn't make sense from an economic point of view. It makes sense from a virtue signalling point of view. And going back to this comment you said earlier about common sense, people want prosperity, they want dignity, they want security. And if you think about, if you live in a city, people who live in London are very transient. They'll stay there for a few years and move on. But many people that live in the shires live very close to the parents and their siblings, and place to them is a very, very important part of their identity. Yeah. And I don't think the policymakers over the last 20 years have understood that.
No, I think that's right, and I think that to a degree, policymakers have been the most uprooted people in our society. The people who don't have that rootedness in place or community or tradition or any sort of values that are beyond the transient and the immediate. But
yeah, I was going to ask you, I don't know whether you were informed before you came on, but I'm a vicar in the Church of England, so I get the religious question. And Reform, I know Reform has recently launched a kind of Christian fellowship, I think, within the Reform Party. I saw something in the media about that. And there's an emphasis on recovering our Judeo kind of Christian roots and values. I mean, have you got a faith background? And is there any? Can you give us any perspective on that? What you feel about that?
I mean, I went to Church of England school. I suppose you'd call me agnostic at this moment in time. I do like the traditions of Christmas and Easter. I think they're part of the foundations of our society. But I'm not deeply religious. But I'm becoming more religiously interested. I was in Jerusalem last year at the place where Jesus was crucified, and then when he rose from the dead, and I found that incredibly moving. Like something came over me. So maybe I am becoming more religious, but I would class myself at this moment as agnostic.
Okay, yeah, that might be. I mean, the malaise in our society that you're describing, is an economic malaise, but it's wider than that. I think it's obviously social and cultural and spiritual, and that's part of our.
I think you're onto something there in terms of the structures that used to give people security and comfort have broken down. Whether it's the village pub where communities will come together, that's now closed, or whether it is church on a Sunday, or whether it is people being involved in voluntary activities. People working 2 jobs, they don't have time.
Yeah.
where I am in the Ribble Valley, there's lots of voluntary organisations, but it's a prosperous place. But a lot of those structures that we built up over many years have disappeared, and I think it makes people feel less secure.
A sense of loss.
Yeah.
Just come back to the point about the politics, or that those fundamental questions are in a sense deeper than our politics, and I think conventional political parties have an incapacity to actually grasp things that are outside a very narrowly defined political terrain. But just a bit of an anecdote, really. A friend of mine who's a campaign director for a children's charity, he was. They go through the rounds. Historically, they've been to the Conservative Party conference and they do their lobbying thing and they have a little stall, and they do the Labour Party conference and they have their little stall, and the Liberal Democrat conference. And for the first time, they were contemplating going to the Reform conference. And for some reason, he thought I might be a useful guide in terms of, telling them what they should be doing and how they should be presenting themselves. I don't quite know where he got that idea from, but the phrase he used to me was, well, they're not like a normal political party. We don't really know how to engage with them, which I thought was a bit of a giveaway comment. But in a sense, I know what he means, because is Reform a party? We got a leaflet from you the other day, and it described it talks about Reform as being a movement. Legally, it's a limited company, but it's also a kind of enormous sort of support system for Nigel Farage as a kind of talisman, whose charisma seems almost to be inseparable from the Reform brand. What would happen to Reform if he fell under a bus? I mean, how dependent are you on the profile and the influence that your leader has managed to secure for himself?
I was with Nigel Farage last week in Yorkshire, and it's incredible the reception he gets. I remember going past this hairdresser's shop, and all these ladies who had foils in the hair came running out wanting selfies with him. He is a formidable politician who connects with people more than anybody else. But I think there's been some polling actually a few months ago that said that, Reform would still be significantly successful, to use your words, if Nigel was no longer there. He is building out the experience through the shadow cabinet that is some very experienced people. The people we have working on policy are some of the best people around. But what Reform does have, as you've said, it has a unique energy. It feels like a movement. It feels like a family. And I think that's why it's so successful. No, I think Reform is here to stay. It's here to continue. I think the challenges the country faces are so significant. The country won't accept business as usual. It wants reform. It wants a reform system that delivers for people.
But that bolstering process that you're talking about, to date anyway, seems largely to have been a process in recruiting, I'm using the word a little bit pejoratively, well, more than a bit pejoratively, sort of shop-soiled Conservative ex-ministers, possibly the kind of people who you might have felt once upon a time had led the party away from your political values and bear some responsibility for the kind of legacy that Reform has been able to benefit from. Is there a danger that you are morphing into a kind of Conservative Party 2.0, to use that vernacular, and will that damage you?
I think that's very unfair.
No, I know it's a question.
One of the criticisms that is levied at Reform is they have no experience, and then they go and get the experience. But both Suella and Robert Jenrick have been very clear about the failings around the ECHR and how that is stopping common sense decisions being made. It was a big disappointment that the Conservative Party, in my opinion, ducked those big decisions. But these were two people that were very vocal about that. And as Suella says, she's come home. So going back to your earlier point, I think the Conservative Party, the parliamentary party, left a lot of people, and they wanted, they believe in the nation state, they believe in hard work, they believe in reward, they believe in low taxes. These are all things that unite reform that the Conservative Party record didn't deliver, even despite the fact that that's what they said they believed in.
I think you're right that, and well, it's undeniable that the nation is in a state of crisis, and I think people are crying out for, at the very least, small R reform, and obviously many people for big R reform. It looks like you have a shout at getting into power. Certainly next week. I mean, we're recording this on, what's the date today? Well, before the local elections.
It's next Thursday, isn't it?
It's next Thursday.
Yeah.
It looks like you're going to wing big. Maybe I don't know how many seats, but you're going to take a lot of council seats. And then you've got a shout, I think, at the general election. How long do you think, on the one hand, how long is this going to take to turn around? And locally, you're already in the game, aren't you? You're trying to turn it around on a local basis. And you were talking about the constraints. So, yeah. What's the time scale on this?
Well, I think it depends on the state of the country and when there's a general election. Nigel has said that he thinks there might be a general election next year. There's a lot of concern around the bond markets and whether they'll continue to lend. What we saw in Greece, when Greece had its debt crisis, was that the 30-year bonds, no one wanted to buy. And then shortly after, they wouldn't buy the 10-year bonds. So it's very very movable depending on what situation the country's in after the next general election. Because if there is an IMF bailout because the bond market wouldn't lend, they'll have some very difficult terms like they had with Greece. So I think, we're getting ready for government. The work is being done by Danny Kruger, and there is a convention that if you have things in your manifesto, they'll not be challenged. So I think you can be in a strong position to move quickly. In Lancashire, if I can talk about that, one of the first things we discovered was that 519 million had been invested in government and corporate bonds that had lost 350 million pounds. And there's a real chance we could have been technically bankrupt if we had to sell those bonds, because then you have to take the loss on your revenue account. But luckily, through the savings we made, the 28 million and the further 65 million for this year, we've been able to avoid that. So even in the most difficult circumstances, with determination, a sharp focus, you can make significant changes in a very short space of time.
I guess just one last point, I suppose, was the reference you made to Reform's appeal and it being an appeal to, in a sense, an extended family. I suppose there will be some communities who, rightly or wrongly, feel that perhaps that invitation isn't being extended towards them. Is that fair? I mean, is that an unfair characterisation? I'm talking specifically about the recent policy, which seemed a bit knee-jerk, which was that Reform would oppose the conversion of Christian churches to mosques. It just seemed like, Christian churches can be turned into carpet warehouses, they can be turned into whatever it is. Was that a bit of a dog whistle potential issue? And, has that sense that Reform is to some degree trading on implicitly, not explicitly, like parties to the far right, but he's kind of talking towards that kind of Islamophobic constituencies. How would you refute that?
Well, we have a number of senior members in Reform who are Muslim. We have Muslim candidates. So I don't think that holds, but I do think, I remember having this conversation with someone who lived in the West Bank in Israel, and they said they couldn't understand why you would change a church into a mosque. For them, and that's a very religious part of the world. So I think there's a recognition that we have a Judeo-Christian heritage, and that but everyone is welcome. What we want to do is come together. We don't want to divide into different sections. We want to come together as one country around our heritage, our culture, our achievements, and our history. And that's one of the big things we're trying to do in Lancashire. So I think people will pick up on individual things and try to make a story out of them, but you've got to look at the overall direction of travel. What we want to achieve is a happy place where everybody feels secure.
Okay, so finally, at the end of your term, whenever that is, your term, your personal term in office, how would you like the residents of Lancashire to judge you, to remember you?
That they felt listened to, that they felt we had been competent and professional, which I think we are, and that they felt there was change, as much change as we could deliver within the framework that we have to govern, and change that makes them feel better about the place they live, makes them feel connected to civic institutions, including the council, and makes them feel proud to be a Lancastrian, which many people are, particularly around our heritage, around the Industrial Revolution, around many of our civic buildings, around the great place that is Lancashire.
Well, thank you, Stephen, for joining us this afternoon, for taking the time out. You're speaking, I think, from your town hall, are you?
I am.
County Hall.
County Hall.
Come on.
County Hall. Get it right,
Keith. County Hall.
Great to have you on the Turning World.
And if you can possibly sort out a junction on our road where we've been trying to get bloody Lancashire County Council to do something about it for the last 2 years, I'll be very impressed.
Send me an
I'll
email
write to you,
and we'll see what we can do.
Thank you very much.
Take care.
Take care. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.